Serging curves can feel like a battle. On inside curves, you might cut too deep, and on outside curves, the edge may not trim at all. But don't worry, I've taught thousands of sewers how to conquer serger curves, and I know exactly how to fix these issues. Hi Sewing Bees, I'm Sookie, and today I'm sharing 4 of my serging superpower tips so you can stop fighting your machine and start loving your serger. Let's start with the basics. At the end of the day, there are only 2 types of curves. Inside and outside. Inside curves, concave, curve inward, like an armhole or the neckline of a baby bib. Outside curves, convex, curve outward, like the bottom of a baby bib. Each one requires a slightly different approach, but once you know what to do, you'll be stitching curves like a pro. Before we get into the actual tips, there are a few things that will set you up for success right from the start. First things first, sergers love to stitch in a straight line, and they're really, really good at it. So your job is to guide the fabric so the raw edges stay as even as possible while moving through the machine. And while we're not focusing on seam allowance here in this lesson, if your project has one, be sure to keep it in mind as you guide the fabric. It'll help you keep everything consistent. Second, if you've ever tried to let the serger blade trim the curve as you go, you probably already know it doesn't always end well. Instead, cut your curve before you stitch. This way you're setting yourself up for success with a clean, even edge to follow. Third, and this is a big one, so pay attention. Your serger's blade starts cutting about 3/4 of an inch before the needle actually sinks into the material. That means that your stitch placement is happening long after the fabric has been trimmed. Keeping an eye on the blade will help you plan your curves and keep your seam allowances consistent, even if that means you need to remove your blade for certain curves. And lastly, before we talk about actual tips, let's discuss the add-on curve presser foot. Not all sergers have one, but if yours does, I highly recommend you using it because they are shorter, typically more narrow, and the foot gives you better control on tight curves, making it so much easier to pivot fabric smoothly and prevent distortion. And fun fact, most curve feet are designed for combination machines, meaning they can work for both overlock and cover stitch or chain stitch. That means you can use them to create some really nice curvy decorative stitches. So if your machine doesn't have one, don't worry. That's exactly why I'm sharing the 4 tips that are coming up. You can still get great results using the standard presser foot. And even if you do have a curved foot, these techniques will still help you because curves can be tricky no matter what foot you're using. And you might be stitching on a curve with a different presser foot, like adding piping around the outside of a curve. All right, now that we've covered the essentials, let's talk about my 4 go-to tips for mastering serger curves. I like to call these my serging superpowers, and trust me, they make all the difference. The first is steer the stitch. This is all about fabric manipulation. The second, pressure makes perfect. We're going to play with the presser foot pressure control. The third, dial in your stitch. Depending on the curve, adjusting your stitch length might fix everything. And then last is feed to succeed. If you've got differential feed on your serger, it can be your best friend. And sometimes just one of these adjustments is all you need. Whereas other times, you'll need to use a combination to get the best results. I like to start with inside curves because they usually require fewer adjustments. But getting them right is all about that control. So the first one we're going to talk about is steer the stitch. Remember, this is all about fabric manipulation. Sergers love to sew straight lines, so your goal is to gently straighten the fabric edge as you stitch to prevent bunching. Use your left hand to guide and your right hand to steer. Think of it as making micro adjustments instead of big turns. Don't pull the fabric. Let the feed dogs do their thing. If the fabric isn't staying flat, clipping into the inside curve can help, but don't clip too deep, especially if you're only using a serger and not reinforcing with a straight stitch. The second is pressure makes perfect. If you have foot pressure control, be its best friend. If the fabric isn't feeding smoothly, lighten the presser foot pressure to help it glide more easily. The third, dial in your stitch. Shortening the stitch length slightly can help pinch in the curve, making it smoother. Give it a try. You will know right away if it helps or hurts. And the last for inside curves is feed to succeed. Differential feed on a serger is one of the coolest things, so get to know it. If your fabric is stretching or stitches are slipping off the edge, turn your differential feed to the largest number, usually 2. What's cool is you can actually see the curve tighten up in real time. And if you want to take notes, I've got you covered. Download my Hello Serger mini handbook. It's a free guide with serger basics and plenty of space to jot down your favorite settings. You'll find the link in the description. And by the way, serger bees, you're doing great. So now let's get on to outside curves. The first, just like before, is steer the stitch. And it's all about fabric manipulation. Outside curves work in reverse. So instead of spreading the fabric, you'll gently guide it inward to keep the raw edges lined up with the blade. Think of it like steering, not turning. Small, steady adjustments are key. And if your serger has a knee lift, use it. It lets you reposition the fabric without taking your hands off, giving you more control. And if your serger has needle up, needle down function, turn it on. It keeps your fabric in place when you stop to adjust. Now, mine doesn't have a button for this, but if I tap the back of my foot pedal with my heel, just like Dorothy clicking her heels, it lowers or raises the needle with one simple click. It's a small feature that makes a big difference. So try using both of these features together and let me know in the comments if your serger has one of these similar functions. The second one is pressure makes perfect. Remember that dial is usually at the top of the machine to help you control the amount of pressure that's coming from the presser foot onto the fabric. Number 3, dial in your stitch. Adjusting the length is especially helpful for outside curves. In fact, this is my favorite tip for outside curves. Just by slightly lengthening the stitch, you'll see a huge difference. If your stitches look too tight or the fabric starts to pucker, increase the stitch length, which helps the fabric move more freely and creates a smoother curve. And let's not forget about feed to succeed. Remember that differential feed can be a game changer. In this case, lowering the differential feed to the lowest setting, usually 0.7, helps prevent gathering on outside curves. It's actually stretching out the fabric slightly. And what's cool is you can literally see the difference as you stitch. So with these 4 superpower tips, you'll have much better control over both inside and outside curves. And if you need a refresher on what differential feed is and how it works, check out this video right here. And until I see you next time, I hope you have a creative day. Bye-bye.